April 9th, 1941. Godthaab Harbor, Greenland. The wind howls like an animal trapped beneath the ice, rattling the hull of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Northland. Lieutenant Commander Edward Iceberg Smith grips the rail as freezing spray lashes his face, each wave slamming with a hollow metallic thud. Somewhere beyond the fog and jagged ice floes lies Europe, already burning. Smith squints toward the shore. A scattering of wooden buildings clings to the rock. Smoke rising weakly from chimneys. Danish flags still flutter here. Though Denmark itself fell to Nazi Germany almost a year ago, Greenland is technically neutral. Officially, the United States has no business being here. Unofficially, everything depends on this island. The engines slow. Orders are shouted over the wind. Marines and Coast Guardsmen adjust their parkas. Rifles slung tight. Boots crunching on frozen steel. No one fires a shot. No one needs to. The message has already been delivered in sealed diplomatic cables and whispered agreements. The United States is assuming responsibility for Greenland's defense. Smith exhales slowly. Until recently, Greenland was a footnote, a blank white smear on a classroom map. Even in Washington, few officers could have told you why it mattered. But now, staring at this ice-choked harbor, Smith understands the truth dawning across the Atlantic. If the Germans get Greenland, the war changes. Just weeks earlier, in Berlin, Kriegsmarine planners pored over North Atlantic charts beneath harsh lamps. Submarine commanders traced routes from occupied Norway and France, their fingers stopping again and again on the same island. Greenland wasn't valuable for its people. There were barely any, or its land. It was valuable because it sat astride the air and sea lanes between North America and Europe. From Greenland, German weather stations could predict Atlantic storms days in advance. U-boats could refuel. Long-range bombers could extend their reach. In a war where weather could decide the fate of convoys, and convoys decided who starved, Greenland was a silent weapon. Back in Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt knew this. Even if the public did not, the United States was still officially neutral, its people wary of another European war. But Roosevelt had already authorized Lend-Lease, already pushed the Navy into the Atlantic, already drawn lines Germany was not supposed to cross. Greenland was one of those lines. The justification was careful, almost elegant. Denmark's government in exile could not defend the colony. Therefore, the United States would do so, not as an occupier, but as a protector. No declarations, no headlines, just men, ships, and quiet construction orders stamped confidential. As Smith steps onto the frozen dock, a Danish official approaches, coat pulled tight, face drawn. There is a handshake, a few formal words. History pivots without ceremony. Within weeks, American engineers arrive. Airstrips are carved out of permafrost with bulldozers that groan and freeze mid-operation. Weather stations rise on lonely ridges, manned by small crews who listen endlessly to the wind and tap coded reports back across the ocean. Radio towers hum. Barracks glow faintly in the Arctic night. The men stationed here begin to realize something unsettling. Greenland is closer to Europe than it feels, and far closer to war. German aircraft occasionally appear at the edge of radar range, shadows on dials. Never close enough to engage, but close enough to remind everyone why they're here. U-boat sightings increase. Convoys passing south of the island send distress calls that crackle through the static, then vanish. Every day, Greenland becomes less neutral, less forgotten. By late 1942, the island is stitched into a growing American Atlantic network. Bases in Iceland, patrols in Newfoundland, escort carriers pushing farther east. Greenland is no longer a quiet outpost. It is a hinge. And yet, even now, many senior commanders still see it as temporary, a wartime necessity, a place to be abandoned once Germany is defeated. They cannot yet imagine a future where the greatest threat does not come from Berlin, but from far beyond the polar ice. They cannot yet imagine missiles arcing over the Arctic, or radar screens lighting up with warnings measured in minutes, not days. For now, Greenland is simply cold, isolated, and dangerous enough to matter. But the ice is watching, and it will not let the world forget it again. November 21st, 1942, Bluey West 1 Airfield, southern Greenland. The C-47's engines scream against the wind as Captain Harold Jensen wrestles the yoke. Snow blasting sideways across the runway. Visibility is barely 200 feet. The ground crew has already lit the flare pots, trembling orange dots swallowed by white chaos. Somewhere beneath the storm, a strip of packed ice and gravel waits. Easy, easy, Jensen mutters, teeth clenched. The tires slam down hard. The aircraft skids, fishtails, then steadies. When the engines finally cut, the silence is startling, broken only by the wind clawing at the fuselage like fingernails. Another plane has made it. Many don't. By late 1942, Greenland has transformed from a guarded secret into the most dangerous stretch of sky in the world. The Allies call it the North Atlantic Air Ferry Route. Canada to Greenland, Greenland to Iceland, Iceland to Britain. It is the only way to move aircraft fast enough to keep up with the war. And it is killing men. Fighter pilots trained under blue skies in Texas now find themselves navigating by dead reckoning and prayer. Compasses behave strangely this close to the magnetic pole. Radio signals warp. Storms rise without warning, swallowing entire squadrons whole. They call it the White Hell. Wrecks begin to dot the ice cap. P-38 Lightnings, B-17 Flying Fortresses, transports packed with spare engines and machine guns. Some crews survive crash landings, setting up camp beside twisted aluminum, waiting days or weeks for rescue. Others vanish completely, entombed beneath drifting snow. In Washington, casualty reports pile up, but so do success stories. Every aircraft that reaches Britain strengthens the bombing campaign. Every successful flight shortens the war. Greenland, once a precaution, has become indispensable. German intelligence knows it too. In the winter of 1942 to 43, U-boat commanders received new instructions. Patrol farther north. Watch the Greenland coast. Look for weather stations. Destroy them if possible. German meteorologists, desperate for accurate forecasts, establish secret installations on remote shores. Small teams dropped by submarine, living like ghosts among the rocks. The response is swift and merciless. See? Coast Guard cutters and Navy patrols hunt the coastline. When a German weather station is discovered at Sabine Island in 1943, the Americans land in Arctic gear, rifles wrapped against freezing, and overrun it without warning. The Germans surrender, frostbitten, starving, shocked that anyone found them at all. Greenland is no longer just defended, it is contested. By 1944, the island hums with activity. Airfields expand. Radar stations sprout along the coast, their rotating antennas scanning endlessly across empty horizons. Weather data flows east and west, feeding invasion planners preparing for something enormous. June 6, 1944, Normandy. Few of the men storming the beaches know it. But the weather window that allows D-Day to happen is shaped in part by Greenland. Data gathered from icy ridges and lonely stations helps Allied meteorologists predict a brief break in the storms. Eisenhower makes his call. The invasion goes forward. When Germany finally collapses in May 1945, Greenland breathes, briefly. Aircraft stop arriving in waves. Patrols thin out. Some bases are shuttered. Papers circulate suggesting withdrawal. After all, the war is over. But even as victory celebrations echo through Europe, a new unease creeps into American planning rooms. In August 1945, atomic fire blooms over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world changes again. Strategists begin to draw new lines on familiar maps. This time, the arrows do not point east across the Atlantic. They arc north, over the pole. The Soviet Union, once an ally, is now a rival with captured German rocket scientists, vast territory, and growing ambition. If war comes again, It will not be fought by convoys and bombers alone. It will be fought by missiles, and the shortest path between Moscow and New York runs straight across Greenland. By the late 1940s, the old wartime airstrips are re-examined. Engineers return. Surveyors mark new locations farther north than ever before. Somewhere above the Arctic Circle, plans begin to form for a base unlike any the world has seen. One that does not just project power, but watches for the end of civilization itself. Greenland is no longer a stepping stone. It is a shield, and it is about to become the front line of a war that no one can afford to fight. June 17th, 1951. Thule, Northwest Greenland. Construction foreman Robert L. Hayes lowers his binoculars, breath fogging instantly in the -20 air. Before him stretches a flat, blinding expanse of ice and rock, the sea frozen solid to the horizon. The only movement is the slow crawl of bulldozers, tiny, defiant insects against the Arctic. "This is it," Hayes says to no one in particular. "The end of the world." They call it Operation Blue Jay, and on paper it looks simple. Build a massive U.S. Air Force base inside the Arctic Circle, capable of supporting heavy bombers, tankers, radar stations, and thousands of personnel. In reality, it is one of the most ambitious construction projects ever attempted. Everything must be shipped in during a narrow summer window. Fuel, steel, food, housing, radar components the size of buildings. When the ice closes, whatever you forgot, you live without. Men work in shifts around the clock, sleeping in tents that snap and groan under katabatic winds screaming down from the ice cap. Officially, Thule Air Base exists to refuel strategic air command bombers. Unofficially, everyone here knows the truth. If the Soviets launch first, this is where America finds out. By the early 1950s, the Cold War has hardened. Stalin's USSR detonates its first atomic bomb in 1949, shattering American nuclear monopoly. Intelligence reports warn that Soviet Tu-4 bombers, reverse-engineered from captured B-29s, can now reach North America via the polar route. Maps in the Pentagon change color. Threat arrows sweep over the Arctic Ocean. Greenland moves from the margin to the center. At Thule, radar towers rise like skeletal giants. The ballistic missile early warning system, BMEWS, is still theoretical, but its philosophy is already in place. See the attack early. By minutes, maybe save millions. Air Force technicians install massive ANFPS-50 radar arrays, their faces raw from cold, fingers numbed inside gloves. When the systems finally power up, a low electrical hum settles over the base. Constant, inescapable. The men learn to live with it. By 1957, the Soviets launch Sputnik. The beep-beep of a metal sphere circling overhead terrifies Washington more than any bomber. Missiles, not aircraft, are the future. And missiles fly higher, faster, and straighter over the pole. Thule becomes indispensable overnight. New radar systems are rushed in. Personnel numbers swell. Analysts stare at glowing scopes for 12-hour shifts, tracking phantom returns and learning the difference between a missile plume and a solar flare. Every anomaly is a potential apocalypse. Then, on January 21st, 1968, disaster comes from the sky, not from the enemy, but from within. AB-52 Stratofortress on airborne nuclear alert suffers a cabin fire and crashes onto the ice near Thule. The conventional explosives in its nuclear weapons detonate, scattering radioactive debris across the frozen landscape. The base goes into lockdown. Danish officials protest. Cleanup crews in protective suits scrape contaminated ice into barrels under the dim Arctic sun. For a moment, the unthinkable seems close. Not nuclear war, but nuclear accident. Yet Thule remains, through détente, through renewed tension, through the slow collapse of the Soviet Union. The base never sleeps. Computers replace scopes. Satellites supplement radar. But the geometry of war does not change. Missiles still fly shortest over the pole. By the 1990s, Some call Thule a relic. The Cold War is over. Budgets shrink. Personnel rotate out. Greenland fades again from headlines. But ice remembers pressure. As the 21st century unfolds, the Arctic begins to melt. New sea lanes open. Russia returns north with submarines and air patrols. China declares itself a near-Arctic power. Hypersonic weapons promise trajectories even harder to detect. At Thule, now redesignated Pituffik Space Base, radar screens glow brighter than ever. Greenland is no longer just early warning. It is the backbone of missile defense, space surveillance, and Arctic dominance, once ignored, once underestimated. Now, if global war comes again, this is where the clock starts. March 3rd, 2023. Pituffik Space Base, Northwest Greenland. The warning console emits a sharp, synthetic chirp, brief, precise, impossible to ignore. Staff Sergeant Elena Morales straightens in her chair, eyes snapping to the screen as green vectors redraw themselves across the Arctic map. It's only an exercise. She knows that. Everyone here knows that. Still, her pulse spikes. Above her, beyond the reinforced ceiling and the perpetual darkness of polar night, satellites are moving at thousands of miles per hour. Below her, cables snake through permafrost, laid down decades earlier by men who never imagined this world. Track confirmed. A voice calls out. Morales exhales slowly. Another drill. Another reminder. Greenland is quiet again, but it is no longer peaceful. Outside the base perimeter, the ice is changing. Glaciers retreat, revealing rock no one has seen in millennia. Summer sea ice thins, opening passages once trapped by frozen certainty. With them come ships, flags, and competing claims. Russia rebuilds Arctic airfields abandoned since the 1980s. Long-range bombers probe NATO airspace, their roots echoing Cold War patterns. Submarines slip beneath thinning ice. Quieter and more lethal than their predecessors, China invests in Arctic research stations and infrastructure. Officially scientific, strategically ambiguous. Every move redraws the same old equation. And at its center, Greenland remains immovable. In Washington, planners no longer speak only of missiles. They speak of space, of sensor fusion, of intercept windows measured in seconds. Pituffik's radars are now linked to a global lattice, tracking objects not just across the sky, but beyond it. The base's mission has expanded. Missile warning, missile defense, space domain awareness. If something launches anywhere in the northern hemisphere, chances are Greenland sees it first. Morales thinks about that during long shifts. How history piles up here like snow layers, each era pressing down on the next. World War II, the Cold War. Now something less defined, but no less dangerous. A return to great power rivalry. In nearby Inuit communities, the presence of the base is both familiar and distant. A reminder of how global forces settle on local ground. Danish and American officials speak carefully now, aware that Greenland's strategic importance also fuels political questions about autonomy and future alignment. The island is no longer just a base. It is leverage. As climate models predict an increasingly navigable Arctic, Greenland's position becomes even more stark. It sits astride emerging shipping lanes, under satellite orbits, beneath missile arcs, beside untapped resources. Every century, someone rediscovers this fact. American commanders once dismissed Greenland as an icy backwater. Then they defended it in secret. Then they built the world's most powerful early warning station on its edge. Now they plan for wars that might begin in orbit and end in minutes. The ice no longer hides the truth. If deterrence fails, if diplomacy breaks, the first alarms will not sound in Washington or Moscow or Beijing. They will sound here, in a frozen room at the top of the world, where a quiet console chirps, and someone like Morales looks up, knowing that history is pressing forward again. Greenland was never just ice. It was always the key.